friends on the other sides of the screens. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Thank you so much for joining and finding time for us to talk about our favorite polar regions. And my name is Kate, as most of you know who have been joining us for the previous webinars. And I work at Poseidon Expeditions at Sales and Marketing Department for actually more than 9 years now. Before we go into all the details and interesting facts that we have for you, we would like to make sure you can hear us and see the screen well. We would like to ask you to use the chatter box and send us A+ if you can hear and see us well. That's a little exercise that we do every time, but it's really helpful. All right, we have pluses coming in the chat. Thank you. Very nice. Very good. Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys, for helping us out with the technologies. Great. Perfect. All right. Well, today, as you can see, we will be talking about Arctic wildlife. And in particular, we will cover some of the following questions for you. So we will talk about the wildlife in the Arctic generally. Of course, we will talk about who is stronger and more dangerous, polar bear or walrus. And we will be glad to cover and talk about interesting facts about the seals and reindeer in the Arctic. And right now, I would like to introduce my co-host and our expedition leader to you. Please welcome Chris Bruttel. Hi, Chris. How is everything going?
Hi, Kate. Greetings from Svalbard. Everything is super good. Good to be here with you today. Thank you very much.
Perfect, Chris. And as you heard, Chris is actually joining us all the way from Svalbard, and he is based in Longyearbyen right now. I am talking to you from Moscow, and maybe for those of you who have been with us previously in the webinars, you can tell that I have a little bit of a changed scenery. You can see a great poster behind me, so I'm actually doing the webinar from the office today. It's really nice to be back, and we are always interested to know where you guys are based. If you could again use the chatter box and enter the country you're based at, that would be really great. We could really look at the geography of our webinar today. Singapore, Estonia, southern part of Germany, Malaysia, Canada. That's fascinating. New Zealand, Australia, UK. Wow, that, and of course Russia.
That's pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. That's quite a geography. And you know, that's what I usually say, Chris. That's my my own line. It's really cool that people from all the different parts of the world can get together in the internet and talk about what they love. And we do the same during our cruises when we go to the Arctic or Antarctica. People from all the parts of the world get together on a small ship and explore beautiful nature of Arctic and Antarctica. All right, well, before we go and talk about those beautiful animals that you've seen on the pictures, I would like to tell a couple of words about Poseidon Expeditions for those of you who haven't been joining us before. Poseidon Expeditions have been on the market for 21 years. So for 21 years, we have been offering expedition cruises in the Arctic and Antarctica. At the moment, we operate 2 ships that take lucky passengers both in the northern and southern hemisphere. Poseidon Expeditions is a small company, but we're very international. We have offices in the United States, in Germany. One of the operational offices is in Russia. And of course, we are welcoming the travelers from all over the world. We are a passionate team of defense of the Arctic and Antarctica, and both teams in the office and on the ship are doing their really best to provide the best experience to our passengers. All right, I think right now it's actually a high time I properly introduce Chris to you. So Chris is our expedition leader and polar guide. Chris works with us in the Arctic and Antarctica. Chris, we would like to know, how did you become a polar guide? How did you get involved with the polar regions, and how exactly did that become your passion?
Oh, yes. I'm not quite as long involved in the polar regions as Poseidon is, but it's quite a while now as well. It was 2012 that I got enrolled in a study in Longyearbyen called Arctic Nature Guide. It's a one-year guide education at the university up here, and within that 1 year, you cover so much practical and theoretical knowledge about glacier rescue, avalanche rescue, about navigation in polar regions, about polar bear safety, about survival in the snow, well, in the beginning of the study, I thought it would be an experience for 1 year, and then I would go back to Germany, where I come from, go back to being a teacher, what I did before. I was a high school teacher for math and sports in my old life. And after that 1 year studying here, suddenly I realized that I might not go back, and that has not changed since 8 years now. So I'm by now very, very stably located in Longyearbyen, if you can say that, while traveling that much between the North and the South Pole. I work in Arctic and Antarctic, and this new life that opened up to me after that study is, for myself, like feeling wise, far from being over. There's still so much more to explore, so much more to learn, that I'm really thrilled that I am actually able to do this now as a profession. And yeah, that's basically how I got to Svalbard and to the Arctic and into that life. My work for Poseidon in these years has been a major part of it. I believe it was and is always very exciting to work on board of the expedition ships. This is basically me indoors doing the work as an expedition leader, planning and structuring an expedition. But to be honest, my true self is probably more found outside, in a Zodiac, as a guide, showing people the amazing beauty of the polar regions, that me fully dressed as a guide, summer and winter outside. Yeah, basically, I don't know. That's me in a short version.
Very outdoorsy.
As much as possible, for sure. It's always a balance. There's times when you're more indoors, and there's times when you're more outdoors. You enjoy every kind of weather and all kinds of different challenges throughout the year. Especially if you like work the whole year in the Arctic and Antarctic regions, then there's days without ships. Then there's snowmobile expeditions, snowshoe hikes, ice climbing periods, like in our light winter in February, March, April, when there's snow but no ships going into the Arctic. And then there's a lot of Arctic exploration in the summertime on ships, and a little break in the autumn, let's say September, October, especially October is a bit of a month in between, and then it's about to start the Antarctic season, at least if we're talking normal terms. Yes, everything seems far away right now.
Absolutely.
But
and
yeah,
we're
we'll see.
looking forward to the times, when we can go back to the ship, and that will, I'm sure we'll have.
Definitely. Yeah.
Well,
especially after preparing this slideshow today, I'm looking at all these pictures. It was really fascinating. I mean, all the pictures you guys are going to see today are either from the professional photographers that come along on Poseidon expedition trips, or some of them are actually from myself. So if you do not see the difference, I'm happy about it. But they're all made in reality in these trips, on these expeditions during these times. But of course, they're kind of a selection, like a best of 8 years of living in the Arctic. So that's a little preparation for all the beautiful pictures that we're going to show you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Chris, for telling us your private story. How did you become a polar guide? Very interesting. It's always interesting to know about the people who actually work in such and live in such remote areas. Well, thank you for the introduction. I think now we are all eager to learn a little bit more about the Arctic wildlife. There are so many people who join Arctic expedition cruises, and one of the highlights for actually a lot of them is to see the wildlife in the natural habitat, and that's once in a lifetime experience, hard to forget, and it's really amazing. Right now on the screens, you can see the general overview of the Arctic wildlife. You can see polar bears, walrus, seal, reindeer, Arctic fox, and birds. And today we will be more concentrating on the wildlife that's based in Svalbard and Franz Josef Land mostly. And of course, for a lot of us, when we hear the word Arctic or Arctic wildlife, the first thing that comes up into our minds is the polar bear, the kings of the Arctic. Chris, do you mind telling us a little more about those beautiful creatures, maybe some interesting facts about the kings of the Arctic?
Yes, for sure. It's going to be tough for me to tell you a little bit about it because I really love polar bears and everything that surrounds them. And I could probably talk way too long about it. So if I get carried away, you interrupt me anytime, right, Kate? Sure, polar bears. However, many of them you encounter, especially in the wild situation in the nature, they never get boring. They're amazing animals. They're great swimmers. They are great hunters. To see a hunt in reality is probably one of the most amazing things that you can witness out there. They're also amazing walkers, long distance travelers. The word for polar bear in the Inuit language is Nanook, which translates as the great wanderer. Even though, yeah, that's quite a fitting name for it. And then of course they're super cute on camera. That is for sure true. Polar bears sometimes seem to play with an audience, with us, when we are encountering them. We usually call those bears like cooperative bears that are really interested in us, looking at us, showing a little bit off. I just slipped through a couple of these amazing pictures where you can really see how bears are not bothered by our presence, but rather interested and looking and enjoying, sometimes enjoying a sunset with us together, or just taking a nap, resting, a mother and cubs. In that case, on just a bare rock. It was a summer picture. There's no more snow left, but yeah, there's plenty of beautiful polar bear encounters possible, at least up here.
Absolutely. Chris, nowadays there's so much information about polar bears in the different shows, different nature shows, BBC, and just media. And actually, a lot of it is devoted to the fact that the life for polar bears in the Arctic is getting a little bit hotter due to climate change. Um, how about we talk about the population of the polar bears in the Arctic, where you can find them, where you can find the most of them? And I know it's not an easy question, but I think we can at least get an opinion on it.
Yes, yeah, for sure. There's a map from the Polar Bears International, actually, that put kind of subpopulations of polar bears around the polar regions. And you can see on that chart that the numbers are varied, and they're from different times. So they're not all up to date. And it's actually, for some areas, very difficult to get data at all. So many areas are completely unknown, but you have an average of polar bears around the polar region, and that average spans between, let's say, 20,000 polar bears if you talk to conservationists, if you talk to WWF, if you talk to Polar Bears International, and between 25,000 and 30,000 polar bears if you talk to more governmental organizations, or governments, Canada, Greenland, Denmark, because the amount of polar bears that we have around the globe is closely connected to hunting permits. So that variation in numbers already shows you a little bit a problem that occurs, of course, because it's well, yeah, it doesn't really matter to, in my opinion, if it's 20,000 or 25,000. The fact that about 1,000 bears every year are killed in legal hunting is not sustainable for the polar bears, especially in these days that it's not just hunting, but also, of course, a diminishing sea ice situation with a changing climate, and not to forget environmental poisoning. So way too high concentrations of lead and mercury in the food source, ending up in concentration in the polar bears. That trilogy of hunting, poisoning, and a changing climate is probably what is the real threat to this species that has been around for hundred thousands of years, if not millions. They had warm periods that they got through, warmer than now, and they managed to get through it and come back. And they, but like I said, the trilogy, that triple impact on them is probably what is threatening the species now. So yes, to answer the question, it's about 20,000 polar bears left around the globe. Yeah.
Sounds great. And how about we talk a little bit about of the life cycle of the polar bears?
Yeah, if you can see the red surrounded area here, basically that's where we are operating in. That's where we're living, Svalbard, Franz Josef Land, the so-called Barents Sea region. And it's very nice to know that this is the only region worldwide where polar bears population is actually growing in numbers, due to the fact that Norway and Russia are protecting these animals very strictly, and also due to the fact that there's no illegal hunting happening, due to tourists coming up, due to visitors, due to a lot of observation among scientists, and also guests that really observe polar bears on a daily basis in that region. There's really no illegal hunting happening, and the ban on hunting since the early 70s is showing a clear factor now that they're actually quite trustworthy now with humans, polar bears, that they're not that shy as in other regions of the world, and actually doing quite well in that little part. But of course, if you look at the rest of the world, and if you look, then it's only a drop on a hot stone. But for sure, better than nothing, and nice to actually work in that region of the world and be part of that development. So especially in the eastern parts of Svalbard and in Franz Josef Land, there's quite a high number of birth dens of mother bears that give birth to young cubs. That happens around Christmas, New Year period time, and then they are in the den for 3 months, growing up to become those sweet little polar bears that follow the mother out onto the sea ice to hunt, to learn how to live, to learn how to survive in that environment. And the young ones, they stay with the mother for 3 years before they get old enough and strong enough to actually make it on their own. And that, yeah, that 3 years is filled up with learning and with trying out and with experimenting. And every bear that has a sibling is considered lucky. Actually, being born, they're mostly 2, if not 3 bears. But in average, only 1, sometimes 2 survives. So it's a tough beginning of the season for bears, especially the first 2 years. They're quite vulnerable. Yeah.
Chris, one more thing that I wanted to ask you, actually. There is this myth about polar bears, probably the most popular one, that they actually hibernate during the winter time. Can you probably get in with some comments on that?
Yeah, it's quite a quick comment. Polar bears do not hibernate. Some other bears do, of course. We know that from black bears and brown bears, and that's where that myth comes from, of course. But polar bears do not hibernate. Actually, the time period in the winter is their time to thrive. When it's very cold, when there's a lot of sea ice, then it's the time of the year where they are doing the best, when they're having the biggest area to hunt in, to gain fat resources. And the summertime, when there's no snow, no ice left, that's probably the hardest time for the polar bears. That is the time period when they're getting a bit desperate, when they would actually start climbing into bird cliffs to get a little snack. And even though a snack like this might be an egg, might be a chick, the adult would probably fly away. is not sustainable at all for a polar bear. The polar bear needs seals. It needs proper amounts of fat and meat to really gain energy to make it through summer. But if the polar bear is trapped on land, which happens more and more in these days, and there's not, let's say, a whale cadaver that's washed onto the beach, or that walrus, it's the toughest time of the year for the polar bears. And it's not a hibernation, but it's a little bit like a conserving energy mode that they're getting themselves into when they realize that they cannot gain anything from walking around too much because there's just nothing there to eat. Then they would rather not walk and lay down and sleep a lot and serve energy, reserve energy, and for the time to come when actually there's possibilities for hunting again. Yeah.
All right, well, that sounds good. But we also heard that polar bears are real good swimmers. And would that be a myth or reality then?
That is actually a reality. We said it in the beginning. They are amazing swimmers. They're super good in the water. What is fun to see is that they're actually not too fond of the water either. So whenever they have a chance, they avoid the water. We have a couple of pictures here of bears trying not to get wet by jumping from ice floe to ice floe, really trying to avoid getting into the water. It's of course amazing shots. But if you ever see a polar bear swimming, then you realize that this is actually also something they're super familiar with. Is this? Let's see if this video starts. Yes. So this was just from the back deck, from the aft deck of the Sea Spirit in Franz Josef Land, actually, shot with a camera, and you can see in the clear water how the bear is almost like plunging around, being very curious and very checking us out, and how he uses his paws for propulsion, especially the front paws. If they swim longer distances, the back paws are more used for steering, and the front paws for propulsion. So they are really good in the water, and they can swim for actually many hundreds of kilometers if they have to, but of course they usually avoid that. The longer they swim, the more energy they use, and actually for a polar bear, swimming is not that easy, because they can overheat very quickly in that icy water. It's hard to imagine, but a polar bear is so well insulated that it has no possibility to get rid of body heat. And while swimming for long distances, while not being able to have a break, the muscles are constantly active, and the bears produce a lot of body heat, which cannot get anywhere. So for a bear in the water, it is actually a high probability, especially if they swim too long or too fast, that they overheat and die potentially. They can drown, of course. They cannot breathe underwater. They're mammals. So for bears, they sometimes swim for long distances without any land in sight. They can smell where they're going. They can try to reach the ice, even if it's quite far away. But generally, they like to have solid ground under their feet. Of course, best if it is ice, but better than just water for a long time. It's also land. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Really great video, to see the exactly how it works for bears to be in the water.
Yeah.
One of my favorite questions now. How about for you? You've been working for quite a long time in the Arctic. What is one of your most memorable experiences or encounters with the polar bears?
Yes, there are plenty, and there are quite a few. But the one that sticks out, and will probably till the end of my days, is an encounter that was connected to one of these thrilling hunting scenes that I mentioned earlier. It was from a winter expedition. We were out with the snowmobiles, and I had a group of photographers. We were out for a whole week, every day, every night. It was end of April, beginning of May, and there was midnight sun already, so it was 24 hours light, but it was still solid frozen landscape. And we had no luck whatsoever. We didn't see any bears. We didn't encounter anything that they actually came up for. So we were getting a bit desperate. And on the last evening, on the last night of the trip, we were parking our snowmobiles on the east coast of Svalbard, quite a few icebergs around, having a little midnight snack. And in that moment, there was a mother with 2 cubs walking around the corner of that iceberg. And for me as a guide, of course, I have a camera as well, but my main concern is more like, are we too close? How is the bear reacting towards us? My photography guests, they were of course super excited and you know, focusing a lot on taking pictures. For me in that situation, it's always like an estimation, like what does the bear do? How do they react? Do I need to start my engine? Do we need to retreat? Or are we actually not disturbing them? And then that mother bear did this in front of us. And that movement, you can imagine, maybe you've seen it on other videos, they are putting a lot of pressure on their front paws by jumping down, and they are actually collapsing snow caves, and with their good smell, they can distinguish where underneath that snow is a seal. So this mother bear right in front of our noses starting this hunt season, and actually it did a successful crush of a snow cave and pulled out a young seal, not yet fur change, still a young one. And basically what comes next was an amazing lesson that she taught the cubs, how to get a seal out of a hole. Then they were eating together. The young ones got bored quite quickly. I mean, they're still mostly feeding on milk from the mother in that time period when they're so young, but they can nibble a bit on real meat already. But to be honest, they started playing around quickly, getting a bit bored, waiting for the mother. This is probably one of my favorite pictures. On that scene, and then they were playing, waiting for the mother to finish up. And when the mother did, basically all 3 of them just left, walked away, and we were not bothered once. We didn't have to start or stop our engine once. It was a real amazing situation. And then we were able to go there and check out the leftovers of what the mother had left behind. And one of the guests actually gave me a video he shot of the whole scenario, and I'm just going to talk you through it a little bit, because it is, of course, one of the most fascinating and cutest thing possible are 2 young polar bears playing. So he was focused during the hunting of the mother, he was focused on the young ones playing there. And what you can see now is that the mother is calling for her cubs. And at least one of them wants to listen right now, right here. And the other one is not that interested in listening and keeps fighting, keeps playing. And then we don't hear that, but it's a distinguished sound. And you can see it was this time a bit more serious, second name basis maybe. And the young ones are following the lead of the mother, because the mother wants to teach them something in that situation. And now they're coming closer. Now you can see that the mother is kind of digging out already that broken snow bridge and pulling out that seal. It's already dead. It's mostly they died from the crash of the snow bridge, from the pure weight of the snow on that small body. But the mother bear is not ready yet to get into that late dinner or midnight snack. So it kind of pulls the seal away, lays it down, shows it to the cubs, and then actually, no, it's not time yet, moves it back, puts it back in the hole, and does that little jump again on it. Watch that. Basically teaching them where to find them, how to kill them, how to get them out, and then it's time for dinner. So yes, I'm not sure if this is probably of a lifetime, I guess. So this is for sure my yeah, up until today, most amazing encounter with polar bears and behavior, especially polar bear behavior in that sense. Yeah.
Fantastic, Chris. That's definitely once in a lifetime. I'm sure that you have to be in the right time, in the right place to be able to see this scenery, you know, and this action happening in front of your eyes. Absolutely
Yes.
amazing. Thank you for sharing. Now we've talked so much, and you guys can still enjoy a little bit of the video, and we'll continue. We've talked so much about the polar bears, about the majestic animals, but do you, Chris, think that there is a little bit of competition for them in the Arctic. Are there any other creatures that are maybe as strong and maybe as dangerous in some way? Maybe we can talk about that.
Yes, yes, of course. In the sense of being a predator, being a hunter, there's nothing that comes close to a polar bear. But in the sense of sheer strength or size, of course, you were thinking about the walrus, and that's something we definitely should talk about, because walruses are, if you just look at the numbers, bigger and stronger and longer and live longer than polar bears. They can get almost twice as heavy as polar bears. So they are for sure a very interesting and very fascinating species, as well as the biggest seal species, at least in the northern hemisphere. There's the elephant seals that further in the southern hemisphere, that are even bigger than walruses, but up here in the Arctic, it's the walrus is the biggest, and they are really truly massive. And for polar bears, it happens very rarely that they dare to hunt them, because it is a dangerous entertainment. And there are a few clips, and maybe you've seen some of them as well, from the BBC, where they have been following bears, and the bears have been trying to have a chance with walrus, because of course if they're hungry they would try everything. But the tactic is usually to cause a stampede, to cause a panic within a group of walrus. And when they are panic driven running into the sea, then it's a high chance that they would roll over a young one, or someone gets injured on the run, and then that's the chance for the polar bear to actually successfully then later kill a walrus. But normally the skin and the fat of the walrus is so thick and so strong that a polar bear has no chance to get through, even though sometimes it looks like now that's the last that walrus has seen from the world. But generally it's not true. And the bear has to be very, very careful of those tasks from the walrus. As you can see here, a mother protecting its calf, trying to push it under herself to protect it from the bear, and the bear is really on top of her. But even with these strong teeth and strong claws, they can't really penetrate the skin of the walrus. And as soon as the walrus is in the water, the game has changed completely anyway. And here again, the bear has to be quick and retreat, because if he gets hit by one of these tusks, it can be severely injured and die on that wound, even weeks or months later, because to be a hunter in the Arctic, you need to be fit and capable of your best. And it's always an interesting encounter if you see polar bears and walrus meet. So when I shot this picture a couple of years ago, we were getting really excited what would happen watching that bear approach that small group of walrus. And it was almost funny in the end, because literally nothing happened, nothing at all. The bear came even closer. One of the walrus, the one here in the back, you can already see it, open eyes. The other one kept sleeping, but this one lifted his head once and the bear ran away. So they're usually not bothered about each other. That is something I can generally say, but then again, there are of course exceptions to the rules. A guide colleague of mine, his name is Nikita. He worked as a zoologist and biologist on Wrangel Island in the Russian Arctic, and he witnessed an encounter with a. Let's see if that video starts as well or not. Between a polar bear and a walrus, and actually in that once that time, the video seems not to start. I'll just tell you a little bit about it. The bear actually succeeded, and it killed a big grown walrus. Now at least you can see a standing picture now. Anyway, it's on an ice floe, as you can see here, and that was a massive big bear, about 700 kilos heavy, so a huge animal. And with all its strength and all its fighting powers, it managed to keep that seal on the ice floe, and the whole fight lasted for more than half an hour, because like I said, even the strongest bear cannot just kill a walrus, but with enough time and duration, it can wear them out, and then the walrus starts bleeding and eventually bleeds to death. And then, of course, if a bear is capable of doing that, avoiding getting hit by the tusks and managing to kill a walrus, the food source it gets from that, the energy it gets from that kill is amazing, and it would grow even stronger and bigger. So generally would make it even a stronger animal in the long run, maybe capable of hunting even more. Yes, so that is also possible, and with every rule we have up here in the Arctic, there's also an exception. So it's a bit hard to say, but generally polar bears are very careful in the approach of walrus.
Absolutely, and you know, polar bears and walrus, and I mean, it's all nature. It all depends on the situation. You really have to get lucky, I guess, if polar bear is fighting or trying to hunt a walrus. But again, there's so many different experiences, and thanks for sharing a couple of them for us to understand how it exactly works in the wildlife. Coming back to the myths, there is one about the walrus. It says that female walrus lives at Franz Josef Land, and male walrus live in Svalbard. Is that still true, or does that change with the time?
That's what you can read in a lot of literature, and it used to be true. It came from the fact that well, in the 50s there were basically no walrus at all left in Svalbard. And, walrus were protected, completely banned from hunting in 1952, and in that time period they were basically extinct in Svalbard. And then after a couple decades, 20, 30 years, in the 80s and the 90s, they started coming back. And they did come back from the region of Franz Josef Land, where they were still in great numbers around. And it's true, in the beginning, it was more the males that did the journey over to Svalbard and then settling in Svalbard. So this is a picture from Franz Josef Land. Actually, you can see young ones, females on an ice floe, quite a big group, maybe also some males among them. It's hard to say. And then they started swimming, especially this is a group of sub-adults, and they can travel long distances. They are amazing swimmers. And yes, it's true, they started settling in Svalbard, and it used to be more males or only males in the beginning. And then after the first females were seen on the east coast of Svalbard, then the males had already kind of reclaimed the west coast of Svalbard. So that used to be true, but nowadays we find mixed colonies, females on Svalbard as well, young calves being born in that region. So nowadays we can actually say that both males and females have made it back to Svalbard, and in growing numbers. It's quite fascinating to see that the more the merrier, they're happier, the bigger the puddle is where they're laying in. So even though we are counting 3,000, 4,000 animals these days in Svalbard, and we're happy about the development because, yeah, like I said, about 70 years ago, there were zero. But if you compare it to, like, let's say 300 years ago, 400 years ago, then we were talking about numbers of, let's say, 100,000 animals in Svalbard. So we're on a good path, but we're not nearly there yet. So it's definitely a way to go, but it's great to see that the development, they are coming back, they're enjoying themselves, they're laying on sand and rocks and can really rest there as well, but also for them, they are not dependent on land. They are just as much like being on an ice floe, resting on ice, cramped together, many of them just like on the sand, or solemnly on a little ice floe like this one. So yeah, quite interesting species as well, and feeding only on clams actually. That's most of their diet. That on the seabed, digging out clams and swallowing them, and that's how they can get that big. Yeah.
Sounds great. Well, very interesting to learn how, you know, everything changes with the time. Climate changes, then again, the population of walrus changes and migrates. A lot of interesting things to learn. And actually, what I wanted to add that we've talked so much about polar bears and walrus, and they're the most majestic and amazing and interesting creatures in the Arctic. Uh, and of course, I just wanted to mention that we are going to Svalbard and with our expedition cruises, and we are going to Franz Josef Land. And those are exactly the places, I would say the best places, maybe Chris, you agree with me, to have those encounters with exactly this species.
Yes, for sure. Svalbard is kind of, I would say, the Arctic in a nutshell. It's a huge variety of different kinds of wildlife, but also, you know, flora on the land that you can, Arctic flora that you can see in Svalbard. But especially Franz Josef Land, if you look at walrus colonies and polar bear habitat, those are for sure the two best places to encounter them and to see them in their natural habitat. So yeah, definitely good places, fascinating places. By the way, for all German speakers, tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock, and that's a side note, I do a little presentation about Franz Josef Land. So if you're interested and if you understand German, send me a message afterwards, or we'll get in touch through Poseidon. We do a presentation about Franz Josef Land, just as Kate mentioned it.
Absolutely. Feel free to send us a message. We'll let you know the details how to join Chris tomorrow talking about Franz Josef Land in German. One more question about walrus. Chris, from your experience, from what you've seen during working in the Arctic, can you say that they are sort of dangerous animals?
I always have trouble with the word dangerous, in the sense that it's always considered, well, potentially they're dangerous to us, among themselves or within the nature, the cycle of life in nature. Yes, of course, they can be dangerous to each other, but they can also be very supportive and friendly and protective. So in the sense for walrus, if they're dangerous or not, I have heard, you know, everybody has heard the stories that walrus might puncture a zodiac with their pointy tusk. And that leads to the fact that you have to retreat, get back on the ship, fix the zodiac. Nothing bad really happens, but it's a little bit of a scare. And to be honest, I have never ever in 8 years seen or witnessed anything like that. I've heard it from colleagues, I've seen the pictures, but I've never witnessed it. And to be honest, I believe that these animals are dangerous when they feel threatened, when they feel approached, when they are not comfortable. And I have had encounters with walruses that are clearly the opposite of threatening, that are super calm and curious, and you know, there are certain sets and rules and regulations, and you're not allowed to approach wildlife up to certain distances. So if a walrus is laying on a beach, you're not allowed to go closer than 30 meters in order not to disturb it. But when you're standing there on that beach, some of these animals are in the water, and I want to share a little video with you that actually happened 2 years ago. It's not happening very often. It's quite a unique encounter, but it's also a very amazing encounter, because I mean, these are way closer than we're usually supposed to go. And I didn't approach them, they approached me. So we were standing on the beach, and then these animals being in the water, coming and checking us out, is something that truly fascinates me. And what fascinates me most about it is the animal is reacting to me. So if I am calm and not talking and down on my knees, or standing very still, like here in that picture, they are approaching me and getting curious and looking at me and checking this out. And if I make one step back or one movement, they're scared, they're jumping, and they're like, oh, what is this? So they're not trying in any way to attack or to be dangerous in that sense. It's pure curiosity. And to have experiences like this is truly amazing. It's unbelievable. It doesn't happen very often. It's out of the book, I'm sure. And like I said, one wrong movement, one wrong body sign, one lecture, and they're gone. They're not about to threaten me in that sense, or to see me as anything that they want to get rid of. It's the opposite. They want to see what's visiting them on that beach. And sometimes I wonder who is watching who in that picture. So I generally do not believe that they're dangerous. I do believe that they need to be respected and taken seriously. And it's always when you're living in and among wildlife that their behavior is most important. And if they are calm and curious and you're calm, then most amazing things can happen. And if they're a bit distant and worried, then you respect that distance and you step away. And that has led for me to many unbelievable encounters. Yeah.
Fantastic story. But you know, to experience that, that's probably really once in a lifetime. And of course, dear friends on the other side of the screen, please understand that to be able to be in such situation, quite close to wildlife approaching you, you really have to have the knowledge and experience of the behavior of these creatures. Because like Chris said, a little movement, maybe if it's too fast, it can scare the animals. And then, of course, we don't want anything like that to happen. So we really have to be super quiet, very respectful to the wildlife, because we are the guests in the area. Well, Chris, really fantastic story. I loved it. How about, so we learned now that actually walrus or polar bears don't hunt walrus. Are there any other hunting habits or anything like that that we can talk about in the wild in the Arctic?
Yeah, for sure. I already mentioned that the polar bears basically are feeding on seals mostly. We get to that in a minute. So the question in a bit is, what about the reindeers? Do they hunt the reindeers as well? And they don't. Actually, with our photographer John on one of the last trips, we managed to do this footage, and I hope the video plays, but it seems like it does not. Sometimes technical issues are bothering us here.
Videos, unfortunately.
Yeah, but you can see a polar bear here, and you can see a reindeer herd, and that young male was actually chasing these reindeers for about 5 minutes, and to run for a polar bear for 5 minutes is long, and he took breaks in between and caught a bit of breath, and then he started chasing them again. But he was really like running after them, and that makes no sense because he did not have any chance to catch one of these reindeer. So to answer the question, no, polar bears do not generally hunt reindeer. There are exceptions to the rules. There are polar bears that have semi kind of focused on luring for reindeer, at least that I have heard of. I've also seen a dead reindeer being eaten by a polar bear. That can have many reasons. A reindeer can fall from a cliff or break a leg, die of natural causes. However, and the polar bear is of course a scavenger as well, and it would not say no to eating a reindeer, but in general, it would not waste the energy of trying to hunt a healthy reindeer, because it is just a waste of energy. He would not catch it. And even if he would, the amount of fat and resources he would get from a reindeer is not sufficient to cover the amount that he used just for that little hunt. So no, they're not hunting reindeer, but we can quickly go through reindeer because they're also fascinating animals. They have really no natural enemies in the Arctic. Like I said, the only one that would be capable of hunting them are the polar bears, and they're really not hunting them. So they are living here since about 10,000 years on their own. It's a species that has developed their kind of individual individually from their ancestors coming from Greenland side actually, and they became a bit smaller, a bit rounder, a bit more adapted to the cold climate. In the wintertime, they look like this. They have thick and heavy fur. In the summertime, shorter, browner fur like this. And yes, well, in between, when they're changing fur, they look a little bit like this. They're not the most beautiful animals, but super cute, super curious as well. It's exactly the same as with all other wildlife as well. If you let them come to you, you can have amazing close encounters. But if you try to approach them, they probably run away. So the most important thing, again, with wildlife, with encountering wildlife, is being calm and being quiet and enjoying the encounters if they're far away or if they're close by. Nevertheless, it's an amazing to see wildlife in its natural habitat and, you know, not in a zoo or something. So they're enjoying the green grass in Svalbard a lot in the summertime. There's actually quite a few places with thick grass layers underneath bird cliffs, usually because that's where they get the most fertilizers from. And yes, the reindeers are good climbers. They can die, of course. They can also fall from a cliff. I said that. They usually die with about 10 years of age. And then, like I said, a dead reindeer would always be scavenged by bears, by foxes. We will talk a little bit about foxes in the end as well, and by birds. So nothing is wasted in nature, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for covering and doing a quick overview of the reindeers. Really fantastic animals, very interesting. I think now we should talk a little bit more about the seals, because there's quite a few different species in the Arctic that you can actually encounter. Maybe you could tell us a little more about those, and then the Arctic fox as well, Chris.
Yes, we go through them. Thing is, you know, we basically got to the point now where we are talking about what actually is the food source for the polar bears, and it's the seals. That's what the polar bears feed on mostly. And if they're lucky enough to get one of these fellows, a bearded seal, then they can live with it for weeks, if not longer. They can weigh up to 300 kilos. They have a big blubber fat layer, which the bear likes very much. The name bearded seals, of course, comes from that big mustache that they're having, and they live on the ice. They live on ice floes, on small icebergs, or like here. And they hunt in the water for squid and fish, and then they rest on the ice floes. But they're never allowed to sleep like any other seal as well. They're only resting ever with one eye sleeping, one side of the brain resting, the other one is awake, because as soon as they are resting properly, they are dead. So to say. They're always threatened by a sneaking up polar bear. So if they're not very much aware of their environment, it's a very dangerous life for a seal. So yes, for sure, the bearded seal is a big prey, but also the ring seal is a very interesting prey for the polar bear. Similar behavior, just a lot smaller. With that ring-like pattern on the back that gave him the name. Also here in the wintertime, it's a solid covered ice cover here on the fjord, and the ring seal is laying, and it has a little hole that it digs out on his own, that allows him to go in and out of the water, to breathe and to rest and to go hunting. And they also give birth on that sea ice. A young seal pup that's born without any cover in a cave of snow on top of the ice is basically not surviving. It's 1% that manages to survive. Everything else is basically eaten by foxes, by birds, killed in the process. So it's a very tough life for a young seal to grow up, especially if it is born without any cover above. So this one, the picture I took last winter, and yeah, it was already dead the next day. It's a bit sad, but that's in a way part of the cycle as well. And the fox and the birds around it, they were very happy about that situation. So it's always a matter of perspective, I guess, how you look at it. Another species of seals that is common also in Svalbard is the harp seal. but a bit further north, a bit more towards the pack ice, a bit more in the open water, drifting ice areas, you can find harp seals. Usually, if you see them on ice floes, they're quite in big groups and also swimming in larger groups. All those seals are in quite frequent number. They're not really endangered in any way, except for the hooded seals, one of the most fascinating looking seals of all of them, especially around Greenland. You can find them east and west Greenland, high up in the north, but also down in the south. And those are actually the only seal of the so-called true seals, so the bearded seals, the ring seals, the harp seals, and the hooded seals that are truly vulnerable and quite close to being on an extinction level, red zone, so to say. And then, of course, there are the harbor seals, and that's the smallest one of the true seals up here in the Arctic, and we know them from Northern Europe as well, from Germany, from Holland, from France, northern coast of France. They are not dependent, and it's the only species that are not seal species up here that's not dependent on the ice. So it's a very interesting development, especially if you focus a little bit on the changing climate as well. So they're thriving right now, especially in Svalbard. The colonies are growing. We find more and more new colonies in different fjords and different shallow areas, because they're not at all dependent on ice. So they live on rocks and sandbanks. They enjoy the rich waters of fish, and they give birth on those rocks as well. So it's really for them not that bad that the ice is diminishing. But yes, I mean, that's one out of many seal species living up in the Arctic, and it's sadly the only one that is not threatened by the retreating ice. Yeah.
Well, thank you for covering all the species of the seals, Chris. It's really nice, and I think it's really appreciated, because when you go or to the cruise, of course, you get to see those creatures, but it's really nice to have some background information about what you see and the differences in between of the different types. And of course, when we are doing the cruises in the Arctic, when we are going to Svalbard or Franz Josef Land or East Greenland, we do have the wildlife encounters. We see all the species that we have shown to you today, but we always have to remember and really keep it in our minds that we are the guests in this area, and we have to be very, very respectful for the wildlife. We have to be very quiet. Of course, before we go on such an encounter, we talk a lot on the ship about what are the rules and regulations, what are the guidelines, what are the distances that we have to keep. Because of course, our goal is to learn more and enjoy these beautiful creatures, but of course, conservation is also one of the points.
Yes, for sure, and appreciate the fact that we are capable of encountering them in their natural habitat in a way that they're not scared of us and not becoming scared of us either. This is most essential, and not every encounter is a close encounter. Sometimes the wildlife doesn't feel like it. Sometimes they're a bit disturbed by the weather, by a bear that's in the area or that has been visiting before, and they behave differently. And for us, that always comes first. And of course, we try, like you say, we try to show those wildlife encounters. We try to, share that excitement that we have for these animals. But like you said, it's always connected to awareness and distance and appreciation of the encounter.
Chris, I know that you also have a couple of images of Arctic fox that are very interesting creatures. Maybe we can do a little bit of information about them. Maybe we have a couple of minutes for those.
Yes, for sure. And you mentioned that we are also talking about the wildlife, and what you're getting now from me is, of course, only a trailer, only a preview, only a little tip on the surface. It's nothing in depth because we just don't have the time for it. And whenever you come on board, we will have time to talk more and in detail about these animals. This is just to tell you that there's a lot more to learn as well, and to encounter when you're actually experiencing it in life. So the foxes are quite interesting because they're somehow in between. They're not strong and big enough to be real hunters. They can't really kill anything that's bigger than a small bird. Even a goose is already big enough to fight off a fox. But of course, the eggs and the chicklings of these birds, that's a good prey for the polar fox. They are changing fur color. Usually in the summertime, they look a little bit like this, brown and whitish, sitting there in the green. Some really cute and beautiful animals. And like I said, they are feeding all of the summertime from those millions of birds that are coming up to the Arctic to breed up here. The sky is full of in this case, Brünig guillemots, but also little auk are nesting in the rocks here, kittiwakes having nests. And even though those nests are hard to get to high up in the cliffs, sometimes an egg falls out of the nest, or a chick falls out. You know, birds die as well of natural causes, and foxes are really scavenging all of those situations and giving birth in the Arctic in the summer in small caves. That's a very cute picture of a young fox lurking out, checking if if it's clear and if he can come out. And again, if you then yell out, there's a fox, he will be gone and not come back. But if you sit there or not move and be quiet, he might come very close to you because they don't know any danger from us. And that's really the fascinating thing, and that's really the most important thing, to keep it that way, that they're not getting scared of us due to our presence or behavior. I said they're brown in the summertime. This is a picture from September, so it was still no snow, it was still green grass, but the fur of the fox had already changed to his winter coat. So this is how it looks in the wintertime, usually quite well adapted to the white environment. But then there's also a morph called the blue fox. About 4% of all foxes in Svalbard are so-called blue foxes, and they have the same color of fur winter and summer. So this is a picture from winter, and he looks still blue and brownish, which raises the question that he's quite easily visible in the snow. And it's quite easy to answer. There's no advantage of not being visible in the wintertime because there's nothing to hunt for them anyway. No birds are around, and the only food source they can get is by following the polar bears out on the ice and eating what they are leaving behind from the seal carcass. And it doesn't matter if you're brown or white in that sense. So yes, there are a small percentage of foxes that are actually called blue fox. Also quite an interesting situation with the foxes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, beautiful creatures. You can really just stay for a while on land and or in the zodiac if you see from the zodiac, and just watch and enjoy.
Yes.
Chris, I know that we also have a couple of pictures about the wildlife, of course, but also how can passengers on the ship experience it and how they usually behave. And of course, one of the most popular questions is it true that the Arctic wildlife is more active during the summertime? And I think some of it we have already covered when we were talking about the polar bears. But yes, let's say about everything else.
I think the question is clearly to answer with a yes about everything else except for the polar bears.
Exactly.
Excuse me. So if you look at the fox, the birds, the reindeer, they are thriving in the summertime. That's clearly when they're most active, when they're gaining most of their energy and resources to make it through the winter. And for the polar bear, it's a bit the opposite. In the summertime, he's a bit less active, trying to survive that harsh period, and then in the wintertime he's thriving, hunting and gaining fat resources to make it through the summer. And in respect for the other question, like how is it actually with, if you are there, if you are as a guest in the Arctic, we mentioned it a couple of times, the respect for the wildlife, the distance. You mentioned zodiacs, and I'm not sure if everybody knows what the zodiac is, but this is a zodiac, quite blurry here because the focus is of course on the wildlife that we are watching here. It's a small boat that you can sit on quite comfortably and approach either wildlife or just also a beach to get on shore. That's our landing boats. And then, like we mentioned, if you are calm and quiet, and then the fox might just walk past you without being scared. Or here a colleague who is sitting polar bear watch on a rock with a reindeer right next to him. Coming closer and closer with every step, because like I said, if you're calm and relaxed, then the wildlife is also reacting appropriately. So there's opportunities for pictures for sure. It's very wise to bring a wide, a long lens camera with you, 300 millimeter, 400 millimeter, like here on that picture for sure. It might even be something bigger. To get those amazing shots of the wildlife, because like I said, you never know how far away you are. And the most important thing is, of course, that they are staying calm and not being influenced in their behavior by our presence. So yes, you remember that beautiful polar bear picture from the beginning, that female bear that was sitting up on that rock? That's basically the making of that picture. The scene where we are in the zodiacs watching that bear, or here a bear actually walking over a glacier, and here on the shoreline. You can really see by the behavior of the bear if he minds your presence or not, if he comes closer or if he goes away, and he's always in charge. And if he goes away, we will not follow. So that's basically how we do this up here in the Arctic.
And to be honest, Chris, I think the pictures that you have just shown about the polar bears can actually demonstrate that if you're going to the Arctic cruise during the summertime, it doesn't mean that the bears are very, very not active. You can still see that they're walking around, that they're not sleeping all the time, but they're just trying to reserve the energy for the best
Exactly.
cases.
They're not hibernating, that's for sure. Yes.
So just if you are going to the Arctic during the summertime, because we go to Svalbard in June and July, and then to Franz Josef Land in July and August, of course you will be able to enjoy the wide range of wildlife and beautiful nature. Chris, fascinating stories, really fantastic experience. Thank you so much for sharing those. And we do
You're
have,
welcome.
yes, sorry that it has taken a little bit longer than we thought, but there's just so much information. There are so many interesting facts we always want to share. And if you don't mind, we do have a couple of minutes for questions. If you have any, please send them in the chatter box. And actually, while we were talking, there were two questions that came in. Chris, if you don't mind answering the first one, I'll read it for you. So, are there certain bears that are more experienced in hunting walrus, like lions who have learned to hunt hippos or elephants?
Yes, for sure, there are. There are also bears who are more into hunting reindeer, more skillful maybe for it. Maybe in the sense for the question in regards of the walrus, they need to be very strong and very big bears to first of all be capable of holding a walrus and basically stopping it from getting into the water, because once it is in the water, not a single polar bear would have any chance against a walrus. But as long as they're on land, they actually can wear it down slowly and steadily and injure it slowly and steadily and make it basically bleed to death in the end. So yes, there are certain bears, especially like the video I would have liked to show you from our colleague who filmed that in Wrangel Island, who are stronger and a bit more, maybe also a bit more brave to encounter that. But like I said, it is always a risky entertainment, and it can go wrong for the bear just as well as it can go wrong for the walrus.
Exactly. It's all nature.
Yeah.
One more question, and I think you probably got the answer during the presentation. It's about the pictures. So how are all these photos and videos are taken from far and from near? And I think we probably can easily say that we have different situations. Sometimes we have the wildlife quite close, and then you can take pictures. And then sometimes we are a little bit far away, but then, like Chris mentioned, you bring the long lenses, and then you get the best shots, right?
Exactly. Yes. So it's everything. And if you come as a photographer, your photography gear backpack is bigger than your clothing backpack. And I personally, I take all my pictures with one lens. It's an 18-300, so it's quite wide range lens, from a wide angle to a long lens. But as a guide, with all the equipment that you carry, with radio and binoculars and polar bear protection and all these things, I just don't have the capacity to handle more than one lens. So I would advise, if you're a thrilled and passionate photographer, bring at least 2, 3, 4 different lenses, from a wide range, from a long lens to a wide angle for landscapes and everything. But also with a pocket camera, also with a digital zoom, you can get stunning pictures up here in the Arctic. I mean, colleagues of mine only use their iPhones for taking pictures, and they get amazing results. The cameras nowadays, they're good, and the light and the air up here in the Arctic is so special, so clear, that you will be surprised how good your own pictures will be of those encounters. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. A very funny question came in, and I think we can finish with that one. So the question is, if you were given the opportunity to turn into the Arctic animal, which one would that be?
Great. I would definitely go for walrus. It's amazing.
Right. Thanks, Chris. I think I might go for polar bear, but we all have our own choices.
For sure.
Dear friends, I think we will finish right now, not to keep you more in front of your screens, but we are very grateful and thankful for joining our webinar today. And I would like, of course, to say special thanks to Christian here, who shared so much passion, so much experience and knowledge about the amazing Arctic wildlife that we have. Absolutely fantastic, a lot to learn, and of course more information about the cruises that you can take, or about the wildlife, again, you can find on our website. If you have any other questions at any time, please feel free to shoot us an email, to give us a call, and we will be glad to share everything we know about the Arctic and its wildlife. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you everyone for being here with us today, and
big pleasure.
enjoy the rest of the week.
Thank you very much as well. Thanks for the attention. And thank you, Kate, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Chris. All right. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you.